Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're going to be doing this. My name is Bradley Khouri. I am the principal of a small office in Seattle. The company's name is B9 Architects, and we are experts in urban infill housing primarily. We are active locally in terms of advocacy and volunteer efforts as well. And that's all driven by an interest in a real focus on successful urban solutions. Most of our work is located in Seattle, but we do work in the immediate region surrounding it as well. My focus over time has been in, I would say, more innovative solutions of the things I've just described. So when we start a project, we ask ourselves a series of questions rather than simply the questions our clients may be asking, which often is, how can we utilize the site the best? Mm-hmm. And for us, we want to talk about access and prioritizing the individual person or communities of people. What kind of architecture is responsive to the place that we're working in? And then how do we work collaboratively within the office and with a group of consultants and our clients to take whatever vision it is that we come up with through those questions and carry it all the way through.
Right. So when you say urban infill, are we talking primarily then multifamily housings?
It is definitely primarily multifamily. There is a mixture of single and multifamily, which still remain primarily urban in solutions. We do some small commercial work. And, ironically, even if not in an urban setting, we are finding that the municipality wants a more urban solution, which does fit well with the way that we approach things. The multifamily work scales from, a duplex, maybe behind an existing structure, something that we actually have termed Urban Plus, a way of adding without having to take away, up to multiple 100-unit mixed-use developments.
And then how large is your office? How many employees do you have?
We're currently a total of 10 people,
Okay.
2 part-time, 8 full-time, and 1 new person starting.
Starting amidst the COVID-19.
Amidst this, yes. And so she's actually supposed to be moving here from a different location.
Wow.
And realizing we'd be onboarding her working from home in either location. We are all deciding to delay her move, and she will onboard from where she lives currently, because it's going to be just like this, whether she's in Seattle or where she currently lives.
Yeah, amazing. So we definitely want to hear more about your whole story and the office in greater detail. But a bit prior to that then, you guys have used ArchiCAD for quite some time, and you found it to be a good tool. So we're curious to know ourselves, and for the listeners, basically, what is it like to use ArchiCAD? Because I think a lot of people out there, architects, are interested in doing BIM, using BIM, but they don't know where to start, or maybe they've heard of ArchiCAD and Revit, and they're not sure which path to take, or it can perhaps feel overwhelming, this idea of using BIM in an office.
So I had worked in the Bay Area for a large firm there, and that was the software they used. This was back in the late 90s.
In the 90s?
And in the 90s, yeah. Wow. We were using ArchiCAD at studios. And so when I started my own practice in 2001, I had to figure out what software platform to utilize. And I just found that it was the one I knew the best, and realized that realistically, that was going to make me be the most effective. Let me just lower the shade here.
Sure.
Tiny bit.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
And so, for me, it's been an evolution with ArchiCAD. It's the only software I've used since then. I've had some experience with AutoCAD way back when, and, don't want to subscribe to two-dimensional work in the way that we do our work. The three-dimensional opportunities that we are able to take advantage of benefit us through the whole process. So Previously, so I started with ArchiCAD at a different firm. I carried it through at B9, started at version 7. We're now on 22, transitioning to 23. And the program has just progressively gotten better. So we are on the subscription, which means we get to upgrade whenever the new version comes out. And that's actually really important to us because we do know that they are always seeking to improve it. From very early on in using the program, I will say honestly, the office used certain capabilities of it, but not everything. Sure. And so where we're at today is we've really evolved through a process of working with consultants on the tech side to figure out how to really take best advantage of what the program can offer. And so basically everything that we're doing is within the ArchiCAD model, and nearly every drawing is actually live to 3D. So the only drawings that are not live are the details. And so that's a two-dimensional drawing process that extracts information from the 3D model. But everything from our floor plans to our elevation sections, wall sections, all of that, enlarged plans, all that information is live within the model, which means any modifications that occur in one drawing get carried through the rest. And it's allowed us really to stay within one platform for all of our representation and documentation. So, we don't use any other software early on to do initial modeling. We can use ArchiCAD for that purpose, instead of using SketchUp and some other software to then turn into working drawings. So we can do early massing within the ArchiCAD model. We, of course, do save out multiple copies as we go, but at the end of the day, it's possible that one file effectively could have taken us from implementation of a feasibility of a site all the way to construction drawings and marketing drawings for our clients.
That is pretty impressive. So we were actually going to ask, do you guys have to use any other programs to supplement it? And it sounds like even from the early conceptual phases where you're doing more exploring and you need more freedom, to manipulate masses and forms and shapes, you guys are using ArchiCAD for that step as well.
We are, yeah. I mean, we definitely take our renders into Adobe's suite of products, and we'll do diagramming in Adobe's products, but effectively all of it's coming out of ArchiCAD at this point.
And when you guys are having to draft details which are not tied to the 3D model, and that reminded me, I suppose people listening know what BIM is, but essentially, and maybe you could explain this better than me, but essentially it's a model that's allowing you to produce your 3D building, let's call it, and also the 2D drawings at the same time. And when you change one, it changes the other.
Correct, yeah. And I should say, too, there are drawings kind of early on, site plans that are maybe not modeling information. They may be fills, which people are probably used to in other or hatches in other software platforms. But the more that we can keep it kind of live and 3D based, the less redundancy we end up with, the less errors we end up with. There's no such thing as changing a window size and plan and then having to go update the elevation, having to go update the window schedule. All those things update automatically. The dimensions, if done correctly, can be tied to the physical elements, so they can update. It saves us a lot of time. It's funny, during graduate school, I was working for an architect in Minneapolis, and at the time, all I did was hand drawing. And so I really was resistant to the idea of working in the computer. And I recall encouraging someone to see if I could draw faster than they could in AutoCAD. And what I learned real quickly was the first time I was faster, but the second time and the third time, as we made modifications, my productivity level and efficiency went way down. And so one of the really nice things about the way the BIM platform works with ArchiCAD is we can be extremely efficient by having that lack of redundancy. Within our drawing sets, I think one of the things that we will always struggle with in the profession is trying to achieve a really perfect set. And without a doubt, having links that key automatically, and drawings that update on their own, as long as we're acknowledging what updates we're making, it's a huge help in making sure that the drawings are of a much higher quality at the end of the process.
Right. And I think the idea of a perfect drawing set is very interesting. It's like this thing that we're always trying to achieve. It's out there somewhere. We will do it one day.
Yeah. One other thing I'd like to add about BIM, and this is active right now in the office. Two things real quick. One is, in light of everything that's happening globally with pandemic, we have clients asking us, what can you do for me to help me show potential buyers of homes when the home doesn't exist and they can't come meet me and they can't come to an open house? What can you provide for us? And so we're looking at how to answer that question with the BIMX model and other means of sharing the live 3D model that can't be edited with potential end users. And so that's the thing that ArchiCAD has embedded within it. And then a second thing we've been doing really, really recently, we're doing an indoor climbing gym, which is not a multifamily project by any means. It's an 11,000 square foot remodel of an interior space. And we're working with a wall designer. We're working with a mechanical engineer and a structural engineer. And we're not all on the same platform, but we're able to share things within BIM. And so the wall designer is in Rhino. He's exporting the wall designs for us. We're putting it into the ArchiCAD model. The mechanical engineer is in Revit, and we're sharing models back and forth. And so we're actually able, it'd be nice to be in one platform for sure, but we really believe in the capacity of ArchiCAD to handle all these things, and we're not interested in switching platforms at this stage. And so the IFC format allows us to share this information and import things. And so we can take the wall design from the wall designer on a Wednesday and have it in our client meeting and in our renders live on a Friday that same week. Same thing with a mechanical engineer. And so it's allowing us to get 3D data to be shared in ways that we've all been wanting to for quite some time, and are really happy to see it happening on a project like that right now.
Yeah, and we've heard of things like this, and I think a lot of listeners have. But it sounds like it actually works, right? Because I think it's one of those sales pitches you hear. Oh, this program can play nice with other ones, and you can import, export, and then when you try it, it's like, well, that's not really it sort of works, yes, but not really. But it sounds like for you guys, it's working out really well.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I think the biggest key is the size of the model, where your model lives, and your bandwidth to connect to that server. Mm-hmm. So, our office has very high-speed internet. We're not able to use it this week because we're all working from home, but we're all connecting in through VPN to access it when we need. And then the ArchiCAD files in a cloud with ample storage. And so we have, people, no one's working on their machines on these projects. And so they take that Rhino export, and we're able to import it into our model. And it slows things down a bit. But once you're in the file and working, the way the teamwork files work within ArchiCAD, you only ever need to get that data the one time you put it in. And after that, it's cached on your computer, and you send and receive to the cloud, called the teamwork server, the BIM server. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't use a ton of memory as you're working. It's just the first time that you open it.
Gotcha.
Or that you add something of significant size to it.
And you were saying that the mechanical engineer for this particular project is on Revit, and the workflow between you guys and him is also something that's functioning well. Yeah, I mean, it's not as smooth, but I think it's because it's just not as I don't want to say not as critical an element, because of course mechanicals are a critical element within a climbing gym. It's just a much smaller piece. Sure. And so we're able to model and share, and that's actually working out really well. Interesting. The wall design is a much more significant thing. It's sculptural. It's three-dimensional. Yeah. It's really what the project is about.
And we're trying to make sure that everything else that we do features the wall as much as we can.
And so you mentioned that your office works on different size of residential projects, and this project that's specifically an interior design one. Do you feel like ArchiCAD is more suited for certain types of projects versus others?
I haven't found there to be a limitation, honestly. We have worked, on single 800 square foot detached accessory dwelling units where one or two people work on the file. And we've worked on 400 unit mixed use apartment projects where we've had two offices, us and another in the file, 4 to 6 people at a time in each office in the model. And, I think you have to be smarter as you scale up.
Yeah.
We use modules and hot links on those larger files where we have repetitive interior elements. We don't model or draw those every time. That's a thing that gets linked multiple times in the model, which helps deal with the kind of nuances of having a big, complicated model. But I would say most of our models are fairly large in size, and so just having the right size and the right solution for off-site storage for us has been really critical. So we work with Amazon Web Service, and it's been flawless, actually.
Oh.
So it allows us to connect to the model from anywhere. And so we previously had it on a server within the office because we have had remote staff over the last 5 years. We chose to move it to an offsite location in a cloud, which allowed anybody to access it with the same kind of connectivity and speed, whether they were in office or not. And that's proving to be especially successful and important right now. And
that's an Amazon service? So basically, it's a remote
Amazon
server.
Service.
Wow, I didn't know they had that.
Yeah, it's a cloud. It's just called the AWS, and it's been great.
And I mean, I guess. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there are a lot of options that one could use. That's the one that we're recommended by our consultants.
And you kind of already answered the question, but the first thing that would come up for anyone who has experience with heavy programs is that must slow down the process, but the way that things work, it seems to be okay.
No issue. No issue. I mean, again, ArchiCAD, if you're working in a solo file, which means it's, on a local server and you're the only one in it, you don't need to go through this. If it's a small practice, you could have all the files on your computer if you're the only individual running the office. And I've been that at one point we were one person. I think the real benefit of the BIM server is there's never a question of, I did a save as, and I've got this other file, which is the current file I'm in right now. The teamwork file is always the current file, and you can save out they're called PLN files as a sort of archive moments, let's say before or after a client meeting, before or after a submittal. And that's there, it's dated, it's on our server within our office, it's backed up to our cloud backup. But the teamwork file is the one that everybody knows to go to, and it allows multiple people to work at the same time, which for us is critical because our projects are big enough where for the most part we don't have a single individual in the file on a given day.
And as far as your machine, did you need to get computers that are super powerful to run ArchiCAD, or are you able to manage with a standard good type of computer?
It's hard to quantify these things without specific numbers, but we found in the offices that we worked at that when we work on heavy BIM files, I mean, you're talking about you have to have an extremely fast machine, and even then, everything grinds to a halt. So, I mean, I know this is a bit vague, but do you guys find that you have to constantly upgrade your equipment, the hardware, to keep up with the software?
I will say probably 6 years ago, I found that. And at that point, we were a 5-person firm. Today, the way we're working, no, it's really not an issue. I mean, everyone in the office is on a MacBook Pro.
Wow.
They're all the fastest computer that you can buy within that model. They're all 15-inch MacBook Pros. They're all portable, so we're all able to move around the office. or take it to a client meeting, take it to an on-site meeting and have the model open. We can, download the file for that purpose if we need it. I think the graphics card is the key. And when we got to that 400 unit project, the graphics card was really important. But it's the same computer that an awful lot of people use at home. I'll be really honest with you. If they, want a nice laptop, we're all on Mac, and that's just a choice that I made years ago. And so, yeah, they're a slightly more expensive computer than a PC, but it's not like it's this extraordinarily expensive piece of hardware. We as an office tend to upgrade the machines every 3 to 4 years. And it does mean that we usually sell the machines that we're phasing out and we buy the next one, but we buy the same machine effectively 2, 3, 4 years later. It's just a newer version.
Your IT guy must love that. I feel like that makes his life really simple. I had asked.
Well, what honestly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just a brief anecdote that I was talking to an IT person at one of the offices I used to work at, and most offices run PC, and I had asked him just out of curiosity. I said, Macs are supposed to be so much easier. If the entire office switched to Macs, would it make your life that much easier? And he was like, yes, let me tell you everything I know about the situation and why it'd be so much better. But, no one does that because I guess it's a little more expensive. Yeah.
It's a little more expensive. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about growing this business and trying to figure out how to work with technology is there was a period where I was doing all this myself, and I would call Apple Care when something came up, or I maybe would go into the store and ask for some help. But, I could deal with a lot of it on my own. And one day I had a server, a separate drive in my machine that the other folks in the office were connecting to. That was our server. And somebody must have plugged in a thumb drive. Maybe I did. And it must have the same name that the server drive did. And our server drive just disappeared. Because the computer renamed it. It renamed it. And so, of course, this was an alarming experience because we had deadlines and submittals and things we were working towards in meetings. And so I reached out to Apple and I said, I need a recommendation for an IT consultant. They gave me 3. One was really malleable and wanted to just sort of solve the question at hand and talk about just how to help me function the way I needed to function. And so I hired them. We ended up cohabitating for a number of years and sharing space. So we were trading space for IT service. And I think it enabled both of us to have a better deal this way. So they didn't do as much for us, and we didn't have to pay as much as we would have if we hired somebody else, and they got a great space. And we got the benefit of them being right there. And so they helped us build our platform. And I just simply listened, things they suggested. Sometimes I was a little concerned, hey, get everybody on a laptop. Well, why should I do that? They're a little more expensive. They're maybe not as fast. And they said, but it's going to give you so much more flexibility. And so where we are now is everybody in the office has a laptop, has a secondary display they connect to in the office. I'm ecstatic that that's the path I took.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because the mode of working on a laptop is such a 21st century millennial thing. Let's go to a cafe and sit on a couch by the kombucha bar and work on our laptop. And I don't know if you guys have a kombucha bar, but it's I think we all kind of assume that that applies for journalists, for bloggers, for that kind of stuff. But anything for lightweight kinds of uses. But for architecture, you would just assume, no, I have to have a desktop because I need that horsepower.
And I used to have 2 machines. I had a laptop that I could take around, and I had a desktop on my desk. And this person said to me, "You've got to get to one computer." This is a huge issue again with redundancy and files and where's what. I would actually log into my desktop from home with a remote desktop, which I know a lot of people use on the PC side of things.
Yeah.
And I just found it for the files that I was using, but that didn't work. If you're opening up a spreadsheet, that's not too bad. But when you're opening up a 100 meg, a 300 meg file, that's just not going to function. So, I'm sitting with my office laptop in my home doing this with you, and, there's just no issues. And I'm running multiple projects at a time during the day, and the rest of my staff does too. So I think that's something I would note is no one in the office works on only one project at a time. And so they may have 3 or 4 copies of the program going, and be working on, an interior of a climbing gym, schematic design of an apartment, working drawings on another apartment or a house. And, we're doing all of that within this one platform. So I think we use technology at a pretty efficient and high level. And we've learned through this, unusual experience we're all going through of working from home, that we were really lucky that we had it set up ahead of time. Right.
So I did want to go back and ask you then, like you just mentioned, that you guys are pretty well set up and you have a workflow that's been established. And I'm curious how long it took to get that running, because I think it's another element of BIM that's very alluring. An easy and small example, like you said, all of your sheets and all the tags, they update automatically. And that sounds amazing to anyone that's listening who's not on BIM yet. But, I've always been curious, like how much work does it take to get to that point? What's the learning curve, so to speak? Because buildings are so complicated that the idea of setting that infrastructure up, again, maybe feels a bit daunting.
Yeah. I think it's a really important question. Again, I have the unusual circumstance of this is the program I used when I worked at a different firm, and when I started my office, it was the one that I chose to go with. So I was familiar with it, but I was by no means an expert at all the BIM capabilities and all the parametric opportunities. I was using it more as almost like AutoCAD or even hand drawings, where the plans were the model, and we were actually drawing the elevations by hand with line work and fills as a way of trying to control the quality of the drawing. The program's improved enough, and I now understand how to use it better over these many years, that we don't need to do that. When we hire someone, it's very rare they know ArchiCAD. We, over the life of the company, have, I think, hired 3 people that were familiar with it. And we train people. And, there's a couple of ways that we go about it. We hire a third-party consultant who comes into the office, and we'll do a one-on-one. It looks like my internet might have just cut out for a sec. Do you guys still see me?
Yeah. We still see you. We got a warning too, but it seems to be okay.
All right, great. Okay, sorry for the interruption. We bring in an outside consultant who does 1 or 2 trainings with new staff. It's a 4 to 8 hour process. And then they have the luxury, obviously, of having people in the office who know the program well that they can ask questions of. We see it's basically a 2 to 3 month process for someone to become proficient. And within that time, they can get better than people that actually have been using it for years, simply because of their commitment to wanting to learn it. But the office is set up such that, we use other software. We use InDesign and Photoshop and Illustrator and Acrobat, as well as, Google Sheets and Docs or Microsoft programs. So we can have people be functioning at a high level within the office right away while they're going through that 2 to 3 month learning curve. I've watched entire offices switch over here in Seattle from whatever they were using to ArchiCAD, and they've worked with that same consultant, and that individual's actually been on site 2 to 3 days a week to help troubleshoot. And so without a doubt, there is always a learning curve anytime you switch software. It is software. We're not talking about something completely different. And so, most folks that you would hire today, or most offices working today, are on some platform, whether it's AutoCAD, Revit, or other product. And so you're familiar enough with an interface. And I've just found us have staff that have worked in those other programs and, started at B9, to be much more intuitive with an ArchiCAD. And, no one has complained to me. And in fact, they actually talk about it in a really positive way, that it's an easier program to use. We feel like we get better renders out of its internal engine. that we then work on within Photoshop or take into Illustrator and do other things too. So learning curve wise, it's not been an issue. I think anytime a new staff person starts anyway, there's a learning curve. So we just provide the support that people need. If they have questions, we make sure that they ask it. We use Slack as an inter-office communication tool. And so, if people are running into issues, they can send a message out in a particular channel on that, and somebody else jumps in and will answer that and help them through whatever the issue might be.
Then you were talking a bit earlier also, I think you had mentioned clients, and we're curious if using ArchiCAD has helped in that area of your workflow in the profession.
I think it's hard to say. I think ArchiCAD does a really good job of supporting my commitment to service because of our ability to produce documents that, are well coordinated. We used to take clients through the model in meetings and make changes live on the go. And I've learned that that's really not the best way to go unless it's really kind of critical for that particular conversation. So what we do for client meetings typically is we will output PDF and present the PDF at the end of the meeting or before the meeting. Sometimes we've shared that PDF with the client. We're trying to spend as little time in the live model with the client as we can, for the most part, because we want to be able to produce the documentation that they will end up with at the end of the day and show them that that's how we can communicate about the project, because they're not building from the model. There are very few projects that I've heard of where, the live model is being referenced on site. I don't know. We've not done that yet. So I think where ArchiCAD does help us with the client is that it's quick. And there are times in the meeting we'll say, if you're not sure you understand it, let's open the file up. We'll make the quick change, and they'll say, wow, that's amazing that you could do that so quickly while we're sitting here.
Right. When you say live model,
it does have an advantage. No, I was just saying it does have an advantage when we feel we need to show them something quite quickly. It happens very fast, and I think they're always amazed.
Right. But when you're saying live model, you mean opening up the file and making manipulations in front of them and doing the walkthrough kind of first-person perspective thing. And we've heard of architects doing that, and that's part of their process with clients, either as just a way to just show them what's been built in the computer, or to do that but also make manipulations. But it always seemed to me like a very slippery road, down toward them just asking you to change everything in the moment.
No, I think that's correct. And I think we also, teaching my staff who are very savvy with technology, that for the most part, these things are being sold, represented, or built from a two-dimensional PDF or a two-dimensional, TIFF or JPEG image. And so it's become really important to us that the drawings that we share accurately represent what we're producing, and that we're not lost in the fact that it's a combination of slabs and walls and windows and roofs and meshes and whatever, morph roof surfaces and objects, that it's a drawing. At the end of the day, it's a thing that someone can, take and look at, and, it's a series of slices through that model. And we have to make sure that those drawings are legible and not get caught up in the fact that, I'm modeling this little detail so it looks right in 3D. But if you go to look at the drawing, it's illegible. We need to draw how it actually gets made. And I think, to us, that's that detailed level within the program where as much as you can model, it makes your life a whole lot easier when you go to cut the details at the end of the day. I have found that we will work in, plan and section within the model, produce wall sections, go from there to details, draw the detail, then go back, update the model so that the wall section looks correct, keying to that detail. And so there is a kind of circular process there, which I do enjoy, and I think gets our drawings to a higher quality. We work with engineers that don't use BIM, and so we will model beams, we will model ductwork, and we try to get the critical key elements in the project so we can look for any inconsistencies or issues that might arise in the field ahead of time.
I was just going to ask you about that. I mean, one of the perks of using BIM is really to kind of facilitate the whole CA process and kind of foresee the issues before they show up on site or during the construction phase, right?
Yeah. And, we don't do a lot of remodels, so I think that does work pretty well for us. Most of our work is new construction. So, there shouldn't be too many surprises once we get out of the ground. We actually have done a project really recently where the excavation and shoring costs were going to be a massive percentage of the construction based on the site. And we were able to compute pretty quickly the amount of excavation in a series of options based on where we set the bottom of our cut and where we set the back of our cut on this pretty steep hillside here in Seattle. And it allowed this client to be able to make decisions fairly quickly. Okay, we need to keep innovating. We need to keep evolving. It's still too expensive. And we found that using the mesh and, using other tools within ArchiCAD, we could calculate that 3D export fairly quickly. And that made it so we got to a solution during even just schematic design, looking at kind of more design development level questions by using the model. And I think that makes it more predictable for that client when they go to try to actually finance the project, because they've been through all the options already. In terms of helping construction, I think it's still back to what you said, David, like getting to the perfect set it's a challenge. And I have found that architects we just need to draw more and hope that our fees cover that. And if they don't, restructure our fees to make sure that the documents that they need, they see as a value. And I think this program allows us to do a better job of planning ahead for those things as best we can.
I suppose establishing that good infrastructure is a big part of that too. But I think that's an interesting point that's one way to establish your value to the client. And then that's a common question that comes up, a common discussion that comes up on here when we talk to different architects is how to again, market might not be the right word, but to sell or to communicate that, what you do has value to a client when a lot of clients just don't fully understand it,
Well, and I think, being in Seattle, there is a very large number of architecture firms here. And so I would say the competition is probably pretty intense. There's a lot happening here, and there has been for a number of years. And so I think most architects would argue that if they're doing a good job, they're very busy right now. We are very committed to service and realizing that at the end of the day, we have to be able to deliver and exceed expectations. That doesn't mean that we design less. That doesn't mean that we, are less critical and less rigorous in our work. It just simply means that we have to go a little extra because I want our clients to feel like, they have a question, they're going to get an answer. They want to collaborate on something. They feel that we're here to listen and provide more feedback. And, we will engage our clients on some very small issues very early on because we've seen it be an issue down the road later. And, we're able to communicate that quite well with the way that we work and come to valuable solutions. And I think it does demonstrate that value. And the best case is they come back and hire us again, right? And so that tells us that the service is something that they valued.
Interesting. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So then a few other questions that I had about ArchiCAD and how do you guys use it specifically. Here's a fun one. What's the best feature about the program?
I would imagine everybody in my office might answer that slightly differently. We use the zone tool in a very, I think, innovative way. So the zone is a three-dimensional element that really can have a bunch of characteristics to it. and it can be used to extract information. So we will work early on in a project with that as our massing tool often, zones and slabs and roofs, and it allows us to produce compelling information for a client as they're trying to figure out how to best utilize the site. For us, in this case, it might be a multifamily apartment building. We might be doing a feasibility study. And so each of the elements within the project are modeled as a zone. The zone has three-dimensional characteristics, and so we can produce diagrammatic massing, renderings, as well as 2D plans, as well as spreadsheets of information that we can export as schedules that they can then use to do analysis on pro forma. So for me, that's a pretty amazing tool. Maybe my second would just simply be the way the process works within all of the things being linked together. I really value accuracy and precision within our work, and the computer has caused people to, I think, focus on that maybe more than they have in the past. For us, just having consistency within the drawings and being able to make changes and have it be, quote, live within the rest of the drawing set is really, really valuable.
I think a lot of people are used to working in their 3D modeling program and then their 2D drafting program. So you have Rhino or SketchUp on one side, and then you have AutoCAD on the other. Yep. And that's a complete mess when it comes to the things that you're talking about, and making sure things are of quality, the drawings, the documentation are of quality, in addition to it being a headache. But of course, with that workflow comes a lot of flexibility and freedom, because you're basically working in raw computer space on both sides. Do you guys find that working with ArchiCAD that, I guess the concern is for those people, it's like, is this going to limit my designs? Am I going to feel limited and confined or constrained because of this tool?
Limited, or are you going to have to decide on details very early on when maybe those questions should come like later because you're seeing them in 3D and 2D?
Yeah, these are super critical questions. So I teach sometimes at the University of Washington, and we just finished a quarter, and our students work the way you just described. They are generally modeling in SketchUp or Rhino, and then they've got to figure out how to make drawings that they can then present. And inevitably, if they don't plan well, they're showing us the Rhino plan or the SketchUp drawing, and these are not good drawings. And so it's a communication tool that I don't think they're fully considering. And the redundancy or repetition you have to go through, let's say, I talked earlier about trying to race somebody on AutoCAD in the mid-90s. And, if I'm going to have to redraw something, I may as well be doing it by hand in some ways. I have more control over the drawing. But I think people are just accustomed to having things be in the computer. So they go from Rhino to Illustrator because it's going to produce a series of lines, for instance. And now they've got to turn that into a drawing. Well, every time they export, they've got to do that same process again, especially if the project's changing. The freedom and the flexibility for me, for a student, where they've not done this very many times, is really important. And so, we've watched students also go from Rhino or SketchUp to AutoCAD. And I think that really impacts their ability to make drawings in a way that are compelling and communicating the ideas that, as instructors, we want them to communicate. Or they're going into Revit, and now they're trying to deal with a model in Rhino and a model in Revit at the same time. They've got two models going, and they're producing kind of working drawing type drawings, which again, I don't think are what we want to have. I don't know a good process for them, but I've seen all of those as options. My hope is that when you've worked enough within the profession, which is probably a few years, BIM shouldn't be daunting as a means of having to make decisions early. You should we've developed a way of working so that starting with the zone allows us to work in massing. We're not building walls. Then we might transition to a kind of material idea, which I think could also happen through a series of walls or slabs or other 3D elements, morphs, meshes. And then we might begin to think about glass and transparency. And again, you can just change materials to communicate ideas. at a certain point, you're going to shift to starting to use the parametric elements of windows and doors and roofs. And, hopefully, if you look at our work, I don't think it feels formulaic. I don't think it feels computer-driven. And so I think we've developed a path and a process. We also design by hand, and we sketch, and then we test in the computer. So I don't see, a real ability to truly design within a program. You can test ideas out. I think that the ideas have to be something that you've generated first. I find that when my staff is designing in software, that it often takes longer than when you try to sketch out a solution and then test it out in the program. So it's sort of a long way of answering, but I think we still design intuitively with our hands. I think we design rigorously by thinking and writing, and then I think we test in the software. And then we can use the elements within it to set parameters and represent things, and really quickly represent things. And so, we've done sort of high-level DD drawings really early in schematic design by modeling and taking things into Photoshop and bringing them back in ArchiCAD and working within those multiple softwares, but don't feel like we need multiple 2 or 3D documentation tools within the architectural side of software.
Right. I think that's really interesting. And the kind of flexibility that you're talking about with the zones, which I'm going to have to look up, gives you the opportunity or the ability to, at one moment, be more flexible and loose, and then decide to begin to integrate more complicated or the parametric components if should you want to. And I think comparatively, some other programs I've always felt like I didn't have that flexibility. Like I was forced to jump way ahead to DD or somewhere further down the line that is like not quite jiving with where my mind is in terms of design.
And I think depending on if people want to use orthogonal lines, diagonal lines, parametric curves, you can do all those things within the different tools within ArchiCAD. And so, for the most part, our projects are orthogonal, faceted, or angled. We don't do a lot of curves, and that's just an intention on my part. But there are morphs and mesh tools within the program that you can then turn into walls and other elements once you're ready to produce the kind of more regular means of representing them. So, I don't want people to think that because we use it a certain way means you have to use it that way. There are other tools within ArchiCAD that allow you to make really dynamic, really complex shapes. And then there's paths to turn those things into walls and floors that allow you to then represent them in drawings.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing you were talking about was the upgrade, right? You said you started on version 7, and now ArchiCAD is at version 23, which is
we have to applaud you. That you might be one of the few. I don't know how many people in the world have had that experience to go from 7 to 23. And that's a pretty powerful evolution for yourself, but also the program.
And so
it's gotten better. And I think that we've enjoyed the improvements. I mean, there were big changes at I think 10 or 11, where it went from being a sort of paper space and model space were two different programs. And that was really awkward, to being integrated into one. I think there were pretty big changes in the late teens, and then, improvements each time. But yeah, it's a significant amount of time in the platform for sure.
So how does that work when you do those upgrades? Because I feel like on other programs, often you just click install the upgrade and you actually don't know what has changed. Does ArchiCAD provide you with some kind of video tour of the new features, or how does that work?
It does. There's also user groups locally that we participate in, or we will reach out to a local consultant and have them come in and walk us through things. I mean, I think a big thing with any tool you use is you got to be committed to it.
Yeah.
And so, we're not going to say we're going to use this really powerful software and then not upgrade when they upgrade, and then not reach out and get feedback on how, or guidance on how to then use the next version. So, we recognize that it's a commitment to use the software. We recognize that it's a financial commitment to maintain and upgrade, but without a doubt, it's a very small expense for the office as a whole. And if we can have our staff be well informed and feel like they're supported in the program they're using, and keep it interesting, I think we'll be more successful that way as a practice. Because we've talked about how we deal with this in terms of our own workload. We've talked about how we deal with this maybe with our clients and our projects. But like having staff feel supported and engaged with software, I think is really important. So they don't get to where they're wishing they were working on something else, or that they didn't feel supported as the changes were getting made, or they got frustrated. And so, we do reach out to local consultants, and we have them come in once a year, generally, sometimes more often, sometimes less, and, do a kind of analysis of how we're working and what other tools could we be doing and how could we use these things better. So, if it was a small 1-2 person office, maybe upgrading isn't that critical. But I feel like because the software has gotten so much better each time, or every 2 versions, we're just committed to that, and then getting the information we need to make sure we understand what we just benefited from. We have to produce a new template every time, and so that slows down the migration sometimes. But we can bring files across from 21 to 22 or 22 to 23 fairly easily. We spin up a new BIM server. We move the files over and switch versions. But making a new template takes a little bit of time. We're a small enough practice that someone doing something else has to then do that. We want to get it right each time. So it's just a commitment to, having there be a quality management segment within the office.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that it is a commitment, because it is not just something you sign up once and then that's it. You have to be involved with it to fully use it at its best potential.
But it's also, the way you're describing it, I think is interesting, because it's kind of how you would approach other aspects of your office anyway. Basically maintaining, and upgrading and updating how things happen in the office. For design, for, staffing, for management, for finances, and then therefore your software and your tools.
Yep. Absolutely. I think things change. It's sort of the one constant that we will always deal with. And being able to be nimble and adaptive is a core value of the company. And, I think whether it's ArchiCAD or it's continuing education on an envelope design, or it's figuring out how to market ourselves better, or, getting involved on a local committee, like you have to invest. Otherwise you just get stagnant. And, we're really committed to moving forward and innovating. And, I think that the software is important as a piece in that commitment for us.
Have you ever had, because ArchiCAD is a pretty well-known program, but it's certainly not as popular as Revit, which has grown into this beast of it's part of Autodesk, and I think that's why it became so popular. But right. Like, I don't know. Maybe this is a bit abstract, but amongst the architecture community where you are, or when you're looking for future employees or talking to colleagues, is there a sense of like, well, I just want to use Revit because everyone else is using it, or that, I think for a lot of younger employees also, it's, I want to go somewhere to pick up this skill so I can migrate to a new office. So in other words, I want to go and learn, build up my resume and my skill set with all the popular stuff that I'm told I need to know.
I've been surprised at the number of people that are actually aware of it. Maybe they don't use it, or they've used it in the past. I think it just depends on where you are. We have hired people who all went to a particular school in Puerto Rico, and they use it. Yeah. And they're extremely skilled at it. And, that was a big surprise to me. But we were, really able to benefit from that. Again, it's a tool, right? It's a piece of software. And, there was a point at which I was the most skilled ArchiCAD user in my office. I'm not anymore. And I'm glad that I'm not. I'm in the files every day. And I think it's important that, principals and, younger staff and project managers, and project designers all can be within the file. And, where someone might say, oh, well, I'm really committed to this other platform. It's happened once to us, where someone said, I've developed a very, incredible facilness with working in Revit, for instance. And I don't want to switch. And, again, we've interviewed and hired a lot of people over the years, and it's only ever come up one time. Most people we have found are just very open. And, we're going to support them from the beginning. So they're not going to come in and be stuck in front of the computer and say, you figure out how to use it. Because that's not very effective for us either. Then we lose out on the benefit of them being effective quickly. So, again, I think it's just a couple of months for someone to get up to speed. And frankly, someone knowing Revit and moving to ArchiCAD, we've seen be really effective where they have a familiarity. And I'm sure going the other way, it also works. But because of how the program works and because of the way we work with it, it's the software that we are committed to. I think most people today are so facile on a computer or facile jumping between platforms and different programs that I really don't see it as a limiting factor. It's much more popular in Europe. Revit was designed, my understanding is Revit was designed by engineers, for engineers, and then Autodesk chose to, market it and purchase it. ArchiCAD was designed by architects for architects, and it's very popular in Europe. And it's not a program that's maybe had as much reach here in America. And I think it's a marketing thing, maybe more than anything, because I think the program is probably as or more powerful than Revit. And we have a number of offices that we talk to locally, we compete with locally, that have switched to it, and I know we're really happy with it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting. So you were saying that you teach part-time at the University of Washington, and your students are using Rhino on AutoCAD. So I'm curious to know about the teaching aspects, but also you were saying that the students having that flexibility to kind of try and create something in raw space when they're undergraduate, I believe is what you said, is really important.
Yeah, so I've taught thesis and I've taught junior and graduate and senior levels, and developing an ability or a familiarity with a rigor first is important. And so what tool they're using for me it's almost irrelevant. I want them to find one they're comfortable with. I want them to develop an ability to be critical of their work, to be able to analyze their work and their decisions, and hopefully see that a decision, as you've gotten further down the path, that might not have been the right decision. And you don't just keep forcing it. You go back and you look at that first decision and say, well, was there a different path I could have taken that might have gotten me to a better place down the road? I've watched them use SketchUp or Revit generally as their 3D tool, and then go to Illustrator, AutoCAD, Revit as their means of them producing drawings. And I watched it be really painful at the end of the quarter this year, where someone who had never used Revit and was learning at that quarter was trying to then take their Rhino project and represent it in Revit. And, occasionally we've seen folks use ArchiCAD in school. I think it would be the same process because they probably aren't ready to be working in a parametric program early on in the design process. The UW also is quarters, and so it's 10 weeks. And you need to be working quickly. You need to be able to be in, whether it's physical model or 3D model, making decisions fairly and testing things out fairly quickly, because it's not a 15-week semester. Though I think I'd argue the same thing if it was a semester. So having as much freedom as possible, I think, for students is important. And then figuring out how to represent their ideas is then, it's equally as important. And so I don't think it's a great process right now to go from a model to some other means of representing the drawings because they're not done designing. They're still modeling in Rhino while they're producing their final drawings in whatever other platform or in SketchUp. And as a result, you get inconsistent drawings. And, I would not encourage students to necessarily use one platform or another. I think it's more important that they develop that means of thinking and that means of being self-critical and developing a rigor and finding a platform that's effective for them. Because eventually they're going to learn them all, probably anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answers your question, but it's the big question for architecture is representation. Are you expressing something new as an idea evolves as you're working, or are you simply stopping your thought process and then documenting it? And I don't believe in the second piece. I think we're always evolving the idea as we take it from, maybe a physical model into writing, into a 3D model, into a drawing. So hopefully whatever platforms we're all working in, they're allowing that evolution, and it's not just a stopping of thinking and now it's time to draw in detail. Especially for students, I think that's super critical.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. I teach off and on when I can and when I have the time, which also I don't know how you manage to run a firm and work part-time or teach a studio. But
yeah, it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge.
How many days a week are the studios at UW?
It's 3 days.
Yeah,
no, I haven't taught through this boom until this past quarter. So I had stopped teaching in 2011 or 12 and just focused on work for the last bunch of years and family.
Yeah. I mean, I think the things you raise with students is really fascinating. And there's been this, I think also, I mean, when you were in school, you did everything by hand, you drew things by hand. So there's this, you learned how to look at a 2D drawing and understand what it meant in 3D. And I've kind of felt that education in school has kind of gone away because of the tools we use. And it's so funny because I think a lot of young graduates come out and they go to offices that work in, let's say AutoCAD, they work primarily in 2D, and that works great for those offices, but the fresh grads have no idea what they're looking at. One, because AutoCAD's a weird thing with the black space and the red lines, but also because they're just not used to looking at a 2D drawing and having to fully understand the space based on, 4 elevations and a floor plan. And it's I don't know what that means exactly, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, again, we communicate through drawings. We communicate through material, through light. And without a doubt, you have to have the ability to understand it in terms of 2 dimensions, because that's how most people who are going to build it are dealing with it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know what percentage of contractors are working with a physical, a computer model, a BIM model on site, but I think it's very small. So most everyone is communicating through a 2D drawing. And then being able to, I think, go between the two so that the 3D model doesn't get too awkward and detailed and bogged down, because at the end of the day, it's not maybe that level of information doesn't produce the drawing that actually communicates how you build it. Mm-hmm. And for students, they're not getting to that level of detail. And so I think spending as much time in the 3D world is important. But still, it has to be communicated. And so, we still ask for plans, site plans, floor plans, sections, elevations, as well as 3D renders. We're not asking for different information than we've produced. I mean, when I was in school, I did my perspectives by hand. So I had my 3D drawings. I made them. I had my 2D drawings. I had a physical model. I think the one thing I see less and less of because of the reliance on BIM or Rhino or SketchUp is we just don't get as many physical models. And I think that's too bad, but I understand why. We don't build a lot of them in the office either.
I did want to ask you, your office, you do a fair amount of multifamily housing, and you have this this gym climbing wall that you're doing, and you have Urban Plus. When you decided to start your own practice, did you know that this was going to be the general focus or direction?
I'd love to say yes, but I didn't. My experience prior to starting this company was all commercial work.
Oh.
Or public work, big projects, 1 million square feet, projects. And, I was drawn to wanting to practice on my own, and I didn't know what that would mean in terms of project type. I also moved to Seattle and started a firm, so I hadn't worked for anybody here. So I didn't have a kind of base project type or connection. And so what ended up starting was residential. And I think inevitably a lot of small firms start with residential work because typically someone they know might be doing one, or someone they know knows someone who might be looking for an architect. And so, the firm started with single-family residential and small townhouse, row house type multifamily, ground-related for-sale housing. And it's morphed over time. I also developed my own work. That was an interest from before I started the practice. And so that means I purchase land, I do a pro forma, I finance the project, I design, permit, and then find someone to build or partner with someone who I currently work with, who is then on the construction side of things. That was intentional. And I think going through and developing the multifamily expertise made it so that was possible, where I saw that as an architect, my kind of equity contribution to a project on my own was the one that most people have to then pay for out of their pocket. When you go to build a project, you're typically taking some kind of a loan out, if it's a development speculative project, or even if it's for the end user, they're borrowing funds from somewhere. And so the construction is paid for often by a loan and a process that, that the client works out within a pro forma or a kind of business model. But in every case, they have to hire experts to design and document and permit the project. Well, I realized that was the one thing I could just simply do after hours or in between projects. I could then take on and design and permit my own work. And then I had to then find somebody who could build for me. And I found that to be not as challenging as I might have imagined because of my connections within the profession. But the multifamily work is now a real passion of mine. Urban work has always been a real passion of mine, and creating spaces that people can share and interact in and feel both comfortable and I think sort of sheltered in, but also be able to interact in spaces where that interaction was designed in, or that interaction is kind of spontaneous and a result of the way people might actually interpret and use space. It's interesting, I've said a couple times today about where the world is right now, and I'm finding more and more that home and shelter becomes a really critical element in people's lives. And so a critical question we talk about in the practice, and I was recently teaching about, is access to equity, or just simply equity in society, both social and otherwise financial. And so majority of the landscape in terms of dwelling in America, and certainly probably beyond, but I can speak more to what I'm more familiar with. There's the ability to have your own space, or have a shared space, or have a small space or a larger space. And that's all based on your capacity, right, in terms of financial ability to acquire, produce, rent, buy, whatever it may be. And that today, the way our urban environments are set up and organized, we focus our growth in particular places where there's maybe transit and where there's services, but there might not be access to great schools, and there might not be access to great open space. And so the social equity piece is looking at how do we take what's called single-family zoning in all of our cities in America, and I think beyond, and balance out the lack of equity for a group of people that don't have the ability to get into those areas because it's more expensive, and therefore don't have access to that great open space, or maybe private yards for themselves, or access to better schools that might maybe be in those areas. And so within our projects and within our practice, we're asking the question of, what can we do on an advocacy level to influence how our cities grow, as we're asking these really important questions. The studio I just co-taught was on this topic. How do we then design spaces within these centers that are denser, that have access to services and are walkable? How do we design living opportunities for people there where they have spaces that are courtyards that are protected, are stoops that are engaging the street, in ways in which they maybe get access to something in those projects that aren't typically provided. Mm-hmm. And so I think we look at a kind of broad spectrum of living, and are realizing just how critical that is right now.
And do you find that Seattle is receptive to this kind of thinking? And I mean, specifically, well, generally, but also I'm just thinking that, down in Los Angeles, urban infill and trying to create more housing for people, which is tied to a lot of the issues you're bringing up, is something they're trying to achieve, and certainly ADUs help. But the idea of a multifamily housing project is scary to a lot of longtime residents. But what's the atmosphere like in Seattle?
I don't think it's very different. I think Seattle is a city that's got a lot of individual neighborhoods, and they have their own character and their kind of own uniqueness to them. And I don't think that's unusual for American cities. I do think there may be more of them in Seattle. I think Seattle's a very residential city, more than most I've lived in. And as a result, I think there's a pretty critical distinction between a single-family house on a lot that might be 4 to 10,000 square feet versus a kind of multifamily condition that's either a series of apartments or attached townhouse, row house style homes. I feel like change is the thing that people probably have the biggest concern about. Not so much what the architecture is, but just the idea that the change is happening. I think better design projects are definitely easier. They're easier for folks to absorb in terms of kind of unexpected, unanticipated growth and change. Now, that probably means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What's a better design project? I think higher quality materials calm neighbors down an awful lot. I know in Seattle, brick for some reason makes everybody a lot happier. I don't really understand that. But there's a texture to it. There's a softness to it. There's a sort of historical understanding of it. But it's not what it was, right? It's now built into the skin. It's hanging off the side of the building. And you kind of have to build twice. So in terms of the wall and the way you assemble things, I think the better sort of more a project can acknowledge the space it's going into, which does, I think, mean designing to its location, maybe not imitating what was there, hopefully, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think a contextual project means one that looks like the things around. I think it means one that's well scaled. I think it means one that's hopefully well executed and well detailed. I think our work does show that, because our projects don't look like the things that they're going in next to necessarily. And, I think our work is well received here, but it also isn't formulaic. And I think a lot of the reaction that is, kind of negative or in opposition to growth is because people are seeing the same thing or the same type of thing happening over and over again at a kind of low budget number that feels like it's focused on the bottom line from the developer that's producing the work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that ties into something I was wondering, is that there seems to be, specifically in the United States, it feels like this onslaught of really I would say poorly designed multifamily housing projects. They are not the worst things most often, but they're like, we had a guest on and they were joking that there's maybe 5 different types of these projects. There's like the ribbon window, the big frame window thing, and I don't know, a few others. And I've always wondered, like, why do we see these 4 or 5 types just being duplicated everywhere? Is it? I don't think most architects find them particularly trendy or attractive. That's not to say you can't have a ribbon or a frame project and it be elegant and graceful and beautiful. I think that's totally possible, but there's a lot that are not that way.
My sense is it happens for a number of reasons. One is sometimes it's the finance side of the business that's making the decision, and so a builder may be able to get a loan in a quicker means, which means there's less risk for them if they simply built the same thing they built last time or a slight variation on it, which is not the way we run our practice, and is not something that we support. We'd rather learn from what we did previously and have that influence how we do the project next time. And that's an expertise that's, I think, proving a benefit to a client. But there's a lot of risk for developers in projects, and the time is the biggest risk. How do you predict what it's going to be like in the marketplace when your project is finished, when it's hard to predict 6 months out? And I think that's why a lot of projects look that way. I feel like we've demonstrated that a better design, better executed project usually returns more in terms of rent and sale, let alone just a simply better contributor to the urban space, more respectful of the neighborhood, and hopefully advancing the question of what's good urban architecture. We don't want to do the same thing we did even a year ago, right? We're going to try to evolve. I think material selection is also leading to this, and so there's a lot of projects that are using less expensive materials, and as a result, causing a lot of projects to look all very similar to each other. And so where we can, we try really hard to research materials and point out the benefit of using them maybe over another one. And sometimes we're successful in it, and sometimes, we're not. And I think it's still incumbent on us to make sure that the project is a good contributor to our urban space, and that we deal with the materials that our client, or the budget that our clients actually got at their disposal.
And I think one of the fascinating things that you said also is that you develop some of your own projects, and that's got to be, I think that's becoming more of a common goal amongst architects, maybe to have a little more control over the project, and also hopefully to make more money. How difficult was that to get into?
The first one was what I was calling Urban Plus, where I'm adding without taking away. And so financially, it meant buying a multifamily zoned lot that could support 2 houses instead of 1. And so the first project was a house in my driveway. So it was difficult to figure out because it's 60 feet long and it's 10 feet wide, and it widens up to 12 feet and 14 feet and 16 feet, depending on where I had space. I was actually attached to my house. Financing it was a little bit of a challenge because banks at the time, they wanted 3 things from me, and I couldn't produce them all. They wanted a track record, which I didn't have. They wanted liquidity, which I didn't have. And they wanted a project that would pencil and that financially was viable. And we had that. And so I had to take some extra steps to prove to them that I could finance it. And that meant making decisions that I didn't expect to have to make. Moving forward from there, then I had a track record, then I maybe had a little bit of liquidity, and I could prove the pro forma would work. And so getting through the first one made things a lot simpler. But developing a relationship, I think, with a local bank was very important because they liked financing work that our practice designed, because they knew that it was going to be a better project in the long run, which meant a better investment for the bank and with their dollars.
Right. So you guys had been, the firm had been established for a bit of time prior to this first development.
Yeah, but I should explain, the firm doesn't develop. I'm the developer.
Okay.
The company just designs the project. It has no relationship to the development, and is a separate entity for a number of reasons. So it's my wife and I that are the developers, and the company then designs the work.
Is there any future to have that fold into the company itself, though?
I don't think it'd be a really good idea as a business model. People try design and build, design and develop. I would say if that's all we did, yes, absolutely. But because we aren't a development company, and the majority of our work is for clients, it's important to me to keep it separate so that any risks that I take as an individual aren't risks that the company's taking.
Right. Interesting. That makes sense.
Financially.
Right. Of course.
As you pointed out, there's two really important reasons that I chose to do it. One was because my values could be more on display and make more of the decisions based on values instead of bottom line. And the second is absolutely a financial motivation, because as an architect, we all get paid hourly. And most of us aren't able to bill at a level that, can compare with other professions. And so this is a way for me to build a different financial kind of mode within my practice as an individual.
And the other question I had was, you were talking about when you are working with other developers, and there's the game of it's not, game is maybe the wrong term, but the conversation to try and communicate that by spending more money on materials or spending more money on the design part of the whole process, that it's going to return some value. And it occurred to me that that what's interesting also is that part of your office and part of, I think, any successful architecture practice is the idea of growth, and you're always trying to advance, which in turn means you're taking risks. So, if you just repeat what you've done in the past, then you're not growing, but also that's an easy way to convince developers that you're now working with new developers that, hey, look what we've done in the past, we're going to do it again. It's a sure thing, it's going to work out. But there's always a little bit of gamble, right? Because if you are trying to push the boundaries in whatever way, whether it be materials or anything else, there's a little unknown factor. How do you overcome that challenge when you're speaking with a client?
Amazing question. So it's a huge piece that I had to learn through practice and just by doing. I think architects, maybe not in every case, but in a lot of cases, we want to design a solution. And so we'll go into the next problem and we'll say, well, we can design a solution. And my staff does the same thing. Instead of looking to someone or looking to something where there might be expertise that you could learn from and would reduce the risk that you've just taken on. We're a practice that went from doing smaller scale to bigger scale work, and it became a much bigger risk. We didn't have the expertise. We had to develop it or hire for it. We didn't have the track record, so we had to build it. And I don't think folks within this field necessarily understand that. I think going through that learning process makes us actually better architects. It's clients come back to us who have been through a growth process perhaps with us, and they stay there. And it's because, we want to collaborate with them. We want to ask questions. We want to try to find the best solution. But without a doubt, having done it multiple times should produce better results. I don't think it always does within the profession. Maybe that's based on a site being different. Maybe that's based on a municipality being different. Maybe that's just based on us trying something, a little bit more innovative. Like if we got good at doing an apartment building, now we're doing a passive house apartment building. What are all the things we have to plan on the passive house apartment building that we didn't have to plan on the building that was, an energy code building? And, how do you deal with that? Okay, you bring more people to the table. And I found that's really the best answer. So the more experts that we can bring in, whether it's accounting, management, legal, attorneys, whether it's a business coach, We do all of that so that those things, we have that basis and that support, and that we're not trying to figure all those things out on our own. We try to really work closely with our developer contractor clients. So some of our clients do both. They develop and build. And then when we can, we bring in consultants who can provide us with information early on in the project or later on, depending on where that information is needed. Everything from envelope consultants, engineers, to passive house, energy consultants, and so mechanical, electrical, plumbing. The more information we have, the better we can plan, the much, much smaller the risk actually becomes.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
We had to figure that out. We did have to figure that out.
Yeah.
That wasn't obvious. I didn't go to business school, right? And so it's definitely been a process of asking the right questions and figuring out who can actually answer them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So what project are you guys working on right now?
So the one I mentioned where we were calculating the amount of dirt coming out of the site, it's an 18-unit row house on a very steep hillside in Seattle. And that's really fun for us because the facade's over 300 feet long and it has no neighbors because of where it's situated. And so we're actually kind of creating an urban environment for ourselves in that location. And we're producing our own context. Wow. We're working on a passive house apartment I just mentioned that's in the central area in Seattle, and I'm co-developing this with a partner and client who is really committed to building performance. It's called Cascade Built. They're an amazing company here in Seattle, and that's going to be the second passive house project we've done. First one was also with them, which was a smaller townhouse project. We're really excited about pushing the envelope and having design also kind of communicate that this is going to be an energy efficient building. We're doing some houses that we're excited about that are custom houses, and they're for friends or for clients or people that have just sort of found us based on our multifamily work or our single family work. We're doing some other sort of mixed use buildings locally within Seattle, and then we're working on a house in Kirkland, which is just outside Seattle, on a site that is an enormous challenge to build on. We've just finished a project called Robin's Nest, which we are going to add to our website here probably within the month. And it's a 61-unit mixed-use apartment in Seattle. Real exciting project that just got wrapped up. We end up doing projects that are sort of adjacent to historic buildings or bridges within Seattle on steep slopes. A lot of the sites have gotten more complex, and so our solutions have to respond to those things. And we enjoy that additional challenge. And it's a thing that I think the practice has gotten built around.
Well, you guys are certainly keeping busy, and it's amazing to hear. And thank you so much for coming onto the show virtually. The first remote guest we've ever done, and I think apart from some technical issues we had in the very beginning, this was amazing, and it was so great speaking with you. And I hope that we get to talk again, hopefully somehow in person. I don't know how that would happen, or virtually, but by that point, hopefully by our choice and not because it's mandated by this
that would be great.
Disease.
I would really enjoy that. It'd be fantastic to get to do that. Cool. Thank you so much for having me, and hopefully virtual in this time just shows people what's possible. And I look forward to further conversations.
We dig it. Thank you.
Thanks again.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this week's episode. If you like what we're doing, if you're a new listener or a longtime listener, please leave the show a review in iTunes and the podcast app. That really supports us and shows that, that you love us. well, maybe not love, maybe you like us. You like us, you like the show. You're supporting what we're doing. Yes.
Yeah, leave us a review. You can also, spread the word on all social media by sharing links or stories of our posts. We have a few of you that have been doing that, and every time we see it, we repost it, and we love it. It's amazing. Sharing any of your feedbacks about episodes, or if you have any questions, text the hotline, call the hotline.
Which is 213-222-6950. And of course, we are basically on all of the social medias and the platform. The podcast itself is on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube more often than not, or on occasion. And we look forward to, putting out more content and keeping you all entertained and I don't know about informed, entertained at the very least.
Well, and now that we're starting remote recordings, if you have any architect that's by you that you would want to have on the podcast, feel free to suggest us names, or other people who are not necessarily architects that you think architects who would enjoy listening. Feel free to send out your recommendation.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, this is the Midnight Charette again, and we thank you for listening, and we will talk to you again next week or sooner. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I like that we could talk about a wide range of things, but, for me, it's all connected, right? And how we've chosen this software is it's a part of how we work, and I think hopefully more of our profession is willing to look a little bit past the norm, right? Mm-hmm. And I think in school, that's what we all got exposed to.